Europeans are far more particular about nurturing themselves.
Has any one interview stayed with you and has taught you a lot?
One was with Pankajam Sridevi. She sees leadership as a privilege. That perspective was very inspiring and enriching. Right?
When you have these deadlines to meet and someone says, I can't come in, nurturing at that point could be tough.
So one of the things that we talk about in the book is how do I as a leader manage ambition and compassion? So I think managing polarities becomes very important as well.
Welcome to Bookcast by Bookscape, where every story begins with a spark. In this podcast, we go beyond the page. We go into the minds of storytellers, we go into the minds of authors, we go into the minds of change makers shaping the literary world. I'm Vedika Sood, consulting editor with NDTV 24/7 and former bureau lead with CNN International's India Bureau. And with me are the guests we're going to talk to. I have Nirupama Subramaniam with me, who is a leadership development coach and author, and Rajesh Ramakrishnan, a seasoned CEO and former managing director of Perfetti. And together, they have co-authored The Nurturing Quotient. Lots of questions lined up for you. But let's just first start with the name of the book itself, Nurturing Quotient. What did it take to not only get to this book, but the thought of it? Is it just one thought that you had together, one enlightening moment that this is the book we need to write? Or is it the years of experience that both of you have together in different fields, but converging as far as this book is concerned?
Thanks, Vedika, for having us here. And, it's very interesting. It's obviously coming from a journey that we've both been on, and I'll speak for myself. I think, many years ago, somebody asked me this question: who are you if you don't have your visiting card with you? And as you know, many of us draw our identity from our titles of being a president, a director, and so on and so forth. But first and foremost, we are a human being, right? So one of the things for me, fortunately, is that I've got a lot of other passions with me, which I believe let me a more holistic person and shape me the way I am. So photography is a passion, travel is a passion, and so on and so forth. So I think that's one thing that stayed with me. And that has helped me not just become a better holistic person, but actually helped me in becoming a better professional as well. So nurturing myself has come very naturally for me. And I find that if I'm able to nurture myself well, I'm able to nurture others also. So that's where the seed of the idea came from. And then over a few conversations that we had over the dinner table, we really decided to take this forward into why not convert it into a book.
Dinner table conversations, we'll come to that. But Nirupama, before that, nurturing is not a word you associate with the corporate world. You talk about profits, you talk about deadlines, you talk about quarterlies, right? How did this word come into the book itself? It's a word that's at the very core of your book.
Yes. So very happy to be here to talk about The Nurturing Quotient. So, my third book was called Powerful, The Indian Woman's Guide to Unlocking Her Full Potential. And that was primarily about women tapping into their power, because power is not a word usually associated with women. And interestingly, a lot of people asked, why don't you write something for men? What about the poor men? So that was also, one interesting aspect that came to it, is that nurturing is not a word associated with leaders. 95% of them are male. And the whole idea was to bring this aspect into leadership, because I felt, and then we strongly feel, that this is something that all leaders need. It's not just a feminine quality, it's not a nice to have quality, but it is something critical for leadership success. So in fact, I say this is my book for men. Well, earlier it was for women, but really it is for all leaders. And we wanted to bring this aspect of care for self, care for others, and the other aspects that really deal at a very deep level with who we are, both in connection to ourselves and in connection to the world around. So we really wanted to bring this new aspect and nuance into this, I would say, very hard-wired world of leadership.
So you're a leadership coach. You're a former CEO as well, right? With years and years, decades of experience. How did you draw from that as strengths into this book together as a couple?
So, of course, as a leadership coach and a facilitator, I've had the privilege of working very closely with diverse leaders. So, it's been 20 years since I'm doing this, probably about 30,000 plus people. And, my conversations as a coach, my interactions as a facilitator, all pointed to the fact that there was something missing in the way we approach leadership. When I would coach leaders, very often the solution did not lie in some leadership model or framework. It lay in their ability to pause, understand themselves, put some nurturing practices, which allowed them to bring their best selves to work. And when I would do these workshop facilitation sessions on leadership, very often the questions they would ask would be, yes, I know the numbers, I have the technical skills,
Yes.
but I'm really struggling with people. How do I get the best out of my people? How do I attract talent? So that aspect kept coming up again and again in the workshop. So that's what led me, in fact, to this particular work.
Rajesh?
Yeah, and for me, having observed leaders at close quarters and having worked with them, one of the things I saw a difference between a good leader and a great leader is their ability to take care of themselves and take care of others, right? So that stood out for me. And in fact, it got accentuated during COVID, where a lot of the conversations used to start with, how are you feeling? Tell me, how is your family doing? Before we even got to discussing numbers, even if we discuss it, right? So I think for me, it was coming from that perspective to say that leadership is really about taking care of self and others, and then the business will take care of itself and things will happen.
So essentially here what you're saying is that you have to nurture yourself before you nurture others. Let's stick with that point for a moment. Nirupama, in the book also you write, you can't serve from an empty vessel. So what would you say are the practical first steps leaders must take to first nurture themselves?
Absolutely. So we look at it along 4 dimensions, right? Which is first, how do you nourish the body? The physical domain, right? Which relates to the quantity of energy that you have that you can bring to the work. The second is, how do you sharpen the mind? Which are practices that keep you agile, that keep you focused, that keep you mentally sharp so that you can take better decisions. The third we say is, how do you open your heart? How do you take care of and manage your own emotions? How do you connect with people? How do you really lead from, completely leading from the heart? The fourth is what we call enriching the soul or the spiritual domain, which is connecting to purpose, connecting to a sense of contribution, aligning your work to your values. So if we look at these 4 dimensions, we have very clear best practices which help leaders start on this journey of nurturing yourself.
So Rajesh, we're talking about the mind, the body, the heart and the soul, like Nirupama pointed out. Which of these 4 factors do leaders usually ignore or leave out while nurturing themselves? Because if they do that, obviously then there's a problem with work-life balance as well, isn't there, for themselves?
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? If you look at physical, we called out a few dimensions there. One, of course, is physical activity and exercise. Then there is sleep, and then there is nutrition. So within the physical domain, the one which sort of tends to get neglected is sleep. Right? In fact, some people take pride in saying, I sleep only 4 hours a day or a night, right? So that's one area which gets sort of neglected. The overall, if you look at it, I think the 2 spaces that gets a little under-indexed is the mental domain, which is all about, am I reading enough? Am I listening to podcasts? Am I learning something new? So this learning something new, which we did a lot as kids, as we grow older, the question to ask ourselves is, when did we last learn something new? And that's one area where leaders tend to sort of under-index. Emotional, which is really about having a passion, connecting with people, seems to be broadly okay for leaders. And the other place where there is a little bit of under-indexation that happens is in the spiritual domain. And there in the spiritual domain, we talk about, do you have a set of values that you live by? Do you have a larger purpose in your life? Are you actively contributing to the community? And when we talk about some of these dimensions, we find that because of the hustle and bustle of daily life, there tends to be a little bit of under-indexation happening here.
So when you talk about these dimensions, one of them obviously is the heart, right? And you talk about the emotions of it all. Being emotional as a leader, does that burn you out? Is there emotional exhaustion that you face? Is there the risk of completely burning out or being taken advantage of? Because in a way you're empathizing, but it could backfire. So how much of it is just about enough?
Yeah, in fact, the whole concept of the book, The Nurturing Quotient, is to prevent a burnout. And that is why it's important to proactively take care of yourself, because if you don't, the risk of burning out, the risk of giving too much of yourself can actually be huge. And the interesting thing that many leaders said is that because they are in this position of power and responsibility, they can't afford to show their true feelings. When they are having a really bad day, they still have to put up a brave face for everybody around them because their energy is infectious and the whole organization picks it up. So that also causes a lot of stress and strain, that I can't be my authentic self.
Would you say that that was the biggest challenge they faced from all the people that you spoke to, all the leaders you spoke to? Was that their biggest challenge internally, personally, to be emotional, but just not to be too emotional because that would perhaps backfire?
So finding that right balance across this dimension and across multiple other dimensions was a key challenge, right? And we do explore what are the different polarities, what are the different dimensions that leaders actually struggle with, right? I want to be emotional and kind, but I can't be too emotional. I have to be hard on the numbers, but obviously I can't drive people insane because of that. So finding that right balance that worked for them, allows them to remain authentic, was a big challenge.
Rajesh, the frameworks you introduce, hope and mile, these are simple but yet profound in terms of how you explain it in the book. How can a leader integrate this into daily life and implement it? What would you have to say about that?
Yeah. So when it comes to nurturing others, we have used two frameworks called hope and mile. And maybe I can talk about hope and Nirupama can add on about mile. So hope, we call the 4 qualities that are required to nurture others. So it's humility, openness, patience, and empathy. Right? So that's hope. And when we spoke to leaders, what we found was something like empathy is something that everybody talks about. And that's practiced by almost all leaders. Humility is really my ability to say, I don't know. And having related to that is the openness.
Which is rare.
Which is very rare also.
Yeah.
And related to it is curiosity, which is openness to say, hey, can I know about this? Or I want to learn. So humility and openness sort of go a little bit together. So that's one very interesting part. The one which again under indexes is patience. Everybody wants results like now.
Profits, results,
right? Quarter on quarter results. You need to build business for the short term, for the long term. Nobody has patience. But we all know that, nurturing requires patience. You can't inject steroids into a kid and expect that kid to sort of grow up overnight. It's not healthy, right? So how do leaders develop patience becomes a very, very important quality as well. So that's what we define in our 4 qualities of humility, openness, patience, and empathy. And then we move on to the behavior,
which is the mile.
Which is the mile, because qualities are somewhere inside. How do people know you have these qualities? By your behaviors. So we've identified 4 behaviors that are important for nurturing leaders among all the other behaviors that are important for leader. That is because leaders need to go the extra mile to do these. It may not happen just because you're a leader. So M is for mentoring and coaching. How much time do you invest in actually having those conversations with people which get them to grow, which help them to become better versions of themselves? I is inspiring people to grow, not just to do the tasks. And this has a whole set of behaviors like how do you raise the bar? How do you really motivate people? How do you role model some of these behaviors? The third one is listening actively. Again, many of the leaders said this is a critical skill, but easier said than done. As we all know, I do workshops on listening. Still, people around me will say you're not a good listener. But listening actively can be extremely nurturing for people. And we have research to show that it makes people think better, come up with better ideas, and it creates what we call psychological safety, which is related to E, empowering, which is how do you build an environment where people feel trusted, where they feel motivated to give their best? How do you delegate? How do you give feedback? So under each of these behaviors, we also have a set of best practices that leaders need to practice in order to nurture and grow others.
So Rajesh, you've interviewed more than 115 leaders in this book, which is amazing, guys. I mean, it's a great feat. It must have taken quite a while, a lot of patience as well. But is there any story or perspective from any of these leaders, Rajesh, that you heard, you took back home with you and realized, in my time as CEO, in my time as a leader, I could have implemented this as well?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And I think speaking to 115 CEOs itself was a very enriching experience, I would say.
Of course.
And what we found, one of the interesting things that stayed with me was when it comes to nurturing self, a lot of leaders do it with a lot of intentionality and structured approach. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'll go to the gym. Weekends, I'm going to play golf or whatever, right? But when it came to nurturing others, they all felt, yeah, that's part of my job and I will do it on the fly. So nobody ever said, I'm going to set aside time for listening every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday or something. Right? So that was a very interesting thing that came out, that nurturing others was a little bit happening on the fly. Right. So that was interesting. And then, of course, there were many specific examples that leaders spoke about. One leader spoke about how horse riding, for example, was her go-to. For getting herself for emotional energy, right? So she used to speak to her horse and how being with her horse helped her to become, happy and cheerful. Somebody else spoke about how learning a new skill was something that made them sharp in their mind. So there were different ways in which different leaders sort of expressed that. But I think fundamentally what we were seeing was that they all were aware that this needs to be done, and they made sure that they made time for it and wove that into their routine.
And we talk about nurturing yourself and then nurturing others. What's very interesting in the book also, Nirupama, is this metaphor you use of gardening throughout the book. Why should that resonate with today's leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at the leader as a gardener. The old model was the leader as a commander, the leader as a general. I give orders, my team follows. But all the leaders agreed that that model is not going to work today. Not with the kind of younger people we have, not with the rapid changes which are happening around us, which require independent thinking, which require innovation, which requires people to bring their whole selves to work, which requires a blurring of the boundaries between work and life. Therefore, the leader cannot afford to be a commander because you will not get the results. Therefore, what is a new model? So we found this metaphor of gardening to be very powerful. So we look at the 4 things that a leader does as a gardener, which is preparing the soil, just creating the right environment, which is the culture in which your people can grow and flourish. Plant the seeds, get the right people who will thrive in your environment, right? You can't get a cactus and say, this is a tropical forest, so you must grow beautifully out here.
Yeah.
And also plant the seeds of new ideas, new thoughts. And then provide water and sunshine. So you can't just hire and leave the people. You need. Therefore, the 4 behaviors become very important. Mild behaviors are actually for providing water and sunshine. And the last is pull out the weeds, which is what a good gardener should do when there are weeds growing, which are bad behaviors, practices that don't serve you, or policies that are not working. You should be able to pull them out. As we say, sometimes kill your darlings as well. Therefore, we found that for sustainable long-term growth, the metaphor of gardening made a lot of sense, especially in the context of nurturing
Pulling
leadership.
out those weeds is very difficult.
It's not easy.
It's not easy.
Exactly.
At all.
Yes.
I think that's the most critical of the 4. I mean, from just my perspective here. But, Rajesh, you've been CEO, you've had decades of experience, like I mentioned earlier. What would you say is the difference between an Indian leader and a leader overseas when it comes to nurturing leadership?
Yeah. We looked at various factors that play a role in how much you nurture self and others. And of course, demographics are there, personality is there, how you grew up. Those all make a difference and input into how much you nurture or not. But one of the factors definitely is cultural nuances as well, right? And culture could be to do with the culture in which you grew up at home. It could be the culture in the organization where you work, or it could be culture at a country level, right? So at a country level, to your point, and I don't mean to generalize, but what we saw was, for example, Europeans are far more particular about nurturing themselves. So they're very happy to take a break. I still remember one of my earlier bosses in PepsiCo went on a 1-year sailing holiday with his family. He took a sabbatical. He, his wife, and 2 daughters, they went sailing around the world for a year.
I want to do this as well.
I would love to do that as well. And I was like thinking, oh my God, how could somebody take off for a year when I used to think twice about asking for a 2-week vacation?
But
right?
Is that a very Indian thing?
I was about to come to that. So in India, you find people are very hesitant to take breaks, although it is changing a little bit now. But there is this thing that, A, if I'm not there, the work will collapse. It is not the case at all. And B, if I take holiday, that means I'm not being fully committed to work. And there are many such mindsets that operate, unfortunately.
And I think Nirupama also mentions that in the book when she talks about the ulcers. You were working for a bank, I believe, and at that point, the joke around the
Yes.
room was that
Yes.
unless you don't, report with ulcers or complain of ulcers,
We used
you
to
aren't
say
being successful.
6 p.m. is half day. Right? Or you're leaving at 6 p.m. So it's half day for you.
Correct.
It's almost expected that you put in the long hours and you have the badges of hard work and dedication. Unfortunately, one of them happens to be ulcers. But it's changing now, I
Yeah,
think,
I
which
think
is
so.
which is why people are expecting a nurturing workspace.
So then, Rajesh, if you had to really measure the metrics in terms of nurturing leadership in hard business economics, how would you do that?
Yeah. So one metric I will talk about is we have a NQ assessment test as well. It's a 10-minute test if you take. It gives you how much you nurture yourself and how much you nurture others. It's a behavior based.
And how do you do that?
So it's a small test that you can take. It's
Yeah.
online.
Mhm.
So you scan
it's
the
there.
code which is there in the book,
Mhm.
and that will tell you based on a certain set of behaviors,
QR code.
how much do you nurture yourself and nurture others. So that's one way you could do it. But I think in organizations, one of the things which is very important for everybody to realize is, look, nurturing self and nurturing others is not some fluffy, goody thing to do, right? What we are saying is, guys, if you don't take care of yourself and if you don't take care of others, you can't take care of the business, right? So to your point on how do we measure it, I think any business has two parts to it. The hardcore what part, which is the strategy, and then there is a how part, which is how do you go about doing it. So the strategy is important, the KPIs are important, all those need to be there. What we are talking about in nurturing quotient or nurturing leadership is the how part of it. And if you are able to do that well, the metrics could be in the form of organization health surveys that we do, or are we getting certified as a great place to work in? And I'll just give you a small example. I ran for Fetty for 5.5 years. We doubled our business in that 5.5 years. But one of the things that I'm very proud of is 5 years in a row, we got certified as a great place to work.
Lovely.
So even though the business results were happening, it was in combination with people results where people says, I want to work in this place. I think that's the piece that we are talking about, where the what and the how combine very well.
True. Coming to you, Nirupama, allow me to play the devil's advocate now just for a few moments. Your book itself is titled The Nurturing Quotient. Now, for many critics, it would be great in theory. But when it comes to implementation, especially when you have, deadlines, you have profits to mark, how much of this can really transition from theory into practice?
Yeah, which is, one of the things we wanted to take care of when we wrote the book, which is why we interviewed 115 CEOs to say, hey, does this really work in practice? What is it that you do? And happy to share that it is a reality. It is not theory. So we have very specific behaviors and best practices that anybody can do. So our thinking was, if an extremely busy CEO can do that, it should be possible for any leader at any stage. Forget leaders in the corporate, it should be possible for anybody. So what it requires is just to be aware of some of these things and make it a part of your daily routine and habit. It is not something you do over and above your day, but it is something that you do as a part of your day. So when you get up in the morning, do you have an exercise and a self-care practice? How do you interact with people? Because you do have to interact with people. Do you listen to them actively? Do you ask powerful questions? Do you just bark out orders? Do you create space to actually have conversations that help people grow? So it's about putting these into your daily routine and seeing it, as Rajesh said, as the how of what you do, rather than seeing it as something separate that you do after the work gets done.
But, this empathy factor that we've been talking about, it's difficult, Rajesh, just responding to the question I've just asked. When you have these deadlines to meet and someone says, I can't come in, I'm sick, or someone says, I have a headache, or there's a mental health issue, nurturing at that point could be tough.
Yeah. And I think that's where, you raise a very valid point. And I think that's where these polarities and how you manage polarity become important. So one of the things that we talk about in the book is, how do I, as a leader, manage ambition and compassion? Right? We have to have those ambitions. We have to set those KPIs. We have to go after business results. But can I do it in a more compassionate manner? If, to your point, somebody is sick, can I put in somebody else from the team to step up and get the work done? If for some reason our business plans don't give the desired result, can we be a little kinder to ourselves be a little kinder to others to say, okay, what did we learn from this and how can we move forward? So I think managing polarities becomes very important as well.
So then let me ask you this. In the book, you talk about a generation of baby boomers. You talk about Gen X. And most of the CEOs that you would have spoken to perhaps are from these two generations. But then you have Gen Alpha, right? We're from a generation where we never clocked the hours we were at work for. This is a generation, and I'm generalizing here, of course, but this is a generation that is very clear. 8 to 6 are my working hours. I have a life beyond this. I truly believe in this work balance, work-life balance, right? So then when it comes to a nurturing leader and a situation where I have worked for hours and decades, and I'm very proud of the hours I've put in every day, maybe 18, 16, 14, not even clocking them, and you have that generation as part of your team, how do you balance it?
Yeah. I think fundamentally the concepts of nurturing leadership don't change. But to your point, what changes is the language that I use. The way I understand the drivers and derailers of that generation, and how can I adapt myself to sort of meet the needs of that audience, right? I think that's where a discerning leader and with good listening skills is able to pick up stuff. Just to give you a simple example, when I was growing up as a young business person, the thing was I should work for a company, stick around there for a long time and sort of build my career there, right? Sales to marketing to brand manager to marketing manager, etc. Today, I hear some of the 25-year-olds say that I will volunteer my time for this organization if I deem it's worth my effort, right?
Yeah.
So knowing that firstly is very important. So how do I get to listen to people and get to know that? And then how do I tailor my narrative and conversation to sort of meet their needs? So I think fundamental concepts don't change, but the language, the narrative, how you will sort of address those needs and drivers is something that we'll have to manage as a strong leader.
Now, I just want to add to that because we have a 24-year-old daughter who has entered the workforce. I have a 25-year-old teen mentor. I do a lot of work in inclusion and diversity. I actually run workshops called Managing a Multi-Generational Workforce. So one of the things we figured is that the fundamental aspect of nurturing, which we say is respect for others and listening, don't really change at all across the board. But the style of interaction needs to change. And the other important thing is our own biases and assumptions.
True.
Sometimes, it's very easy to dismiss an entire generation as, oh, they are so entitled, or they don't want to work. That could be a bias that we think.
Absolutely.
So when we are ready to put aside that bias and truly listen to what matters to you and how can I serve you, I do think there will be people, even amongst this generation, who are willing to work, not necessarily longer, but smarter and make sure they get the things done.
And perhaps they are showing us how to get that work-life balance in ways that we never learned.
Probably.
So you can't diss them completely, really. Okay, so this is my favorite part of the conversation where I take you away from the boardroom into your living room. All right, and I have a few questions for you. Firstly, how long did it take to write this book?
About 2 years.
So for 2 years, you were on one mission together, not only as co-authors, but as a couple as well. So where did you draw the line where you said, okay, this is time to talk about the book, and this is the time to stay away from the book when you were, holding those conversations?
I don't think we had those boundaries. We didn't have those boundaries. The talk about the book would pop up at all hours, and sometimes we would just say, okay, that's enough, let's move on. But it was very fluid. Vedika, just moved from one day to another. Sometimes we would be at it for a long time. And of course, we had to schedule the interviews with the leaders right in between our normal work day whenever they were available. So it was kind of, I would say, a mixed bag and no clear boundaries.
Rajesh, you're smiling very quietly out there. So you tell me, that was a diplomatic answer, but was there book time? Was there family time? Or every time was book time?
Yeah.
And any time was book time?
No, I agree with her in the sense that, the writing time was personal time. So when I am writing, so we divided the chapters amongst ourselves. So I was writing a few chapters, so I was spending time
But
writing
would she come
those.
knocking at your door saying, "Are you writing? Are you writing?"
I used to do
He
that.
used to do that. He used to do that with me. And he used to give me deadlines.
So I was the timekeeper for
the
the book.
timekeeper.
Okay.
So I used to make sure that, we stick to certain deadlines to make sure that we finish the book. In fact, she said 2 years. Actually, the writing and everything we finished in a year and a half.
Mhm.
And then Penguin took about 6 months to sort of put everything together and all of that. But yeah, I think the writing time was me time. But then once every chapter was done, we used to sort of discuss it and then bounce it off, etc. And since our work is also sort of fluid, the day job that we do, I think this sort of seamlessly integrated into that as well. So we are going on a long car drive to come to Noida. Then we spend that time discussing about the book and seeing where we have reached. And so
Where's
on
the
and so forth.
couple time then?
That was also part of the couple time.
And, now it's just the two of us, our daughters, working overseas. So, yeah, so basically there is work time, which is, when we do our coaching or we travel for workshops. Otherwise, whenever we are having a conversation among other things like groceries and, where do we go? There's a little bit of the book stuff.
Your daughter would
inserted.
have read the book, I'm assuming.
She has now.
Yeah, and what
Yeah.
does she have to say about it?
Well, I think she said she's proud of us, and we ensured, and we said, are we nurturing parents? Because that's
the
where
biggest
you
test.
learn nurturing, right? You learn nurturing from your own parents, and it shows up in the way you parent as well. So we've got a stamp of approval from her that we are doing pretty okay as nurturing parents.
Yeah, and she could relate to a lot of concepts. Your earlier question on,
Yeah.
how do the Gen Z see it, etc. She could relate to the concepts that we have spoken about in the book, which I think is a good tick
Yes.
mark to have from that generation as well.
And we've also asked her, right? Because she's working now. She's been working for close to 2 years. Like, what do you look for in your boss, in a leader? And what's the kind of work environment does your generation really thrive in? So she also gave her inputs into the.
I don't think there's a perfect work environment that you can really, talk about.
I think it's whatever works for you.
Exactly. And that's where you nurture yourself within, correct? Okay, coming to all the interviews that you have conducted with these leaders across the board, Rajesh, has any one interview stayed with you and has taught you a lot out of all the interviews that you've had with these leaders?
I think, Vedika, more than saying that one interview stayed with me, I think a few points mentioned by different leaders have stayed with me. And I'll just share a couple of
Please.
examples. One of the interviews we did was Ashish Dhawan, who's one of the co-founders of Ashoka, right?
Convergence.
And Converge, who runs the Convergent Foundation now. To me, what stood out was the sheer scale of the vision that he had. So his vision is India is massively under indexed today in the world stage, and therefore, how can I create impact at scale? All of us have our own personal vision and what we work with, but just to have that kind of a vision to say, how can I bring India up on the world stage? To me, was quite goosebumpish in that sense, right? And then there were different leaders who spoke about different things. So one of the leaders spoke about how I have a hands-off, eyes-on approach, right? Which is hands-off. I give my team the freedom and this thing to delegate to them, but don't worry, I've got your back. I've got your eyes on you, and I'll take care of if things go wrong. So I think there were lots of nuggets that I picked up from different leaders, which I think significantly enriched me and hopefully makes me a better leader as well.
Nice. And what about you, Nirupama? Anything that really moved you or stayed with you from all the conversations you've had?
So I think obviously each and every conversation was interesting, but I'll talk about a couple of them. One was with Pankajam Sridevi, who was the head of Commonwealth Bank of Australia. She was heading their GCC. And I've heard her speak at other forums, and I find her to be very inspiring. And one of the things she said is that she sees leadership as a privilege. And every day she tries to be worthy of the people she's leading.
Nice.
And she wants everybody to come to work bringing their whole soul. So I found that perspective was very inspiring and enriching, right? So it's like, I see this as a privilege and I want to live up to my team members. And other interesting thing she said was she took up swimming at a fairly late stage in life because she was scared. And
So
she
you have
took
a
it up
leader
as
taking up horse riding, you have someone taking
yeah,
up swimming.
and also not just as an exercise, but as a way of getting over her fear. So I thought that was very authentic and vulnerable as well.
Mhm.
And there was another leader, Anil Arjun, who runs Story Culture nurture. And he spoke about two very interesting mindsets that he tries to bring to work. One was the egalitarian mindset, which says that everybody is equal. I don't want a hierarchical organization where I only look at titles, but rather I look at the individual. And the second was an abundance mindset, where how can I create an environment where there is enough for everybody and we don't have unhealthy conversation and everybody comes to work with an abundance mindset. So I found those 2 points were very interesting to bring into the workspace, which is usually about titles and scarcity.
All right. My last question, which is maybe a couple of years down the line, you want to write a sequel to this book. He's already smiling, saying, no way, give me some time to breathe. It's
Few
taken a
years,
year.
yeah.
Okay, let's say a decade from now, all right? My question is, from your own journey, what would you want to add to that sequel, the lessons that you've learned along the way? Because this book primarily talks about those 115 leaders you've spoken to. You've been a leader. You're a leadership coach. What would you want to bring into that book, the sequel, whenever it happens, if it happens?
Yeah, I think a few nuances we could add, right? One is to your earlier point on cultural, right? So today in the book, we have 117 CEOs, 32 are women CEOs, which we are very happy about, but around 12 of them are non-Indian CEOs. So can we go a little broader to get true cultural nuances from across the world? That's one. The second, again, to your earlier point, can we get a little bit more multi-generational, even in the leaders who we interview, right? This time it was all 40 plus, let's say, right? So can we get to younger startup founders, entrepreneurs, etc., so that we get a flavor from there? And the third is, I believe this concept is relevant for people across the board and not just corporates, right? So while we did get a few bureaucrats and we did get a few people from the armed forces, can we go to a more general population to understand how does it play out in their life? Like every mother nurtures their kid. So how does that play out from that point of view of nurturing self and other? So I think there are a few nuances that we can bring to the table, but that's maybe for another day.
All right, Nirupama.
Yeah, who knows after 10 years whether we will write the book or some artificial intelligence creature will write the book. So that's the other thing that probably, apart from everything that Rajesh said, which is very valid, what role does technology play? Because that is the world we are heading into. And how do people feature in that world and what does nurturing look like? And also by that time, we hope to have enough data from our NQ assessment that we have, now started. So we've had about 200 people take, who knows, maybe 200,000 people will take it. And we will be able to cut across age, gender, culture, levels and see, hey, what really goes into nurturing and what are the factors that deep down help me to become a better nurturer and otherwise. And hopefully we'll be 10 years wiser and bring some new thing into the book as well from our experience. It would have been very important because we'll be kind of old by then, I think, to make sure that we have nurtured ourselves very well. And I think it's been a good wake-up call for ourselves to be even more intentional about the way we nurture ourselves.
Nirupama, Rajesh, thank you so much. This has been an extremely insightful, inspiring conversation. Well, this brings us to the end of the podcast. But of course, the nurturing quotient clearly is more than just leadership when we talk about leadership. It's a reminder that you need to nurture yourself before you nurture others. So keep turning the pages of the books you read and keep nurturing yourself. Thank you.